Hi, I'm coming to you from the upstairs gallery space here at the Koger Center. And welcome to our third Masterworks concert of the season, entitled Wolfgang and Wine. And so, of course, we have the music of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart featured in the second half of the program, his Symphony Number 35, with the subtitle Hafner's Symphony, is in the second half of the program, which closes it. There are about 265 years that separate the earliest work on tonight's program, which is Water Music Suite by George Frederick Handel, and the most recent work on the program, which was Grand Tango, written by Astor Piazzolla, the tango master, that was written in 1982. Three of the four works, though, they come from the 18th century. There's also a work by Vivaldi, which features two of our cellists from the orchestra, Dusan Vukajlovic, who is our principal cellist, and Ismail Akbar, who is our assistant principal cellist. They will be featured. Both of them will be featured on the Vivaldi, and Dusan Vukajlovic will also be a featured soloist in the piece by Piazzolla, the Grand Tango, which was originally written for none other than Rostropovich, one of the most famous and influential cello virtuosos ever in history, but especially of the 20th century. We'll start with talking about the Mozart Symphony. And interesting background about the Hafner Symphony is that sort of all of the passive-aggressive natures of Wolfgang Amadeus's relationship with his father, Leopold Mozart, who was also a composer, a bit of a sort of a stage dad, a stage parent. In a way, he was very much a sort of authoritative figure in Wolfgang Mozart's life. So in 1782, in July, we know this because we have all of these correspondences, these letters that Mozart wrote to his father, his sister, all these other folks, and thankfully, a lot of those letters have survived. So we know sort of the background into how some of these pieces came about, and also sort of an interesting family drama behind it. It's sort of like in today's world, if we could go through like people's past Facebook posts or tweets or something like that, and you might run into some back and forth between somebody's family members and so on, kind of glimpse into their family dynamic a little bit. And here we can do that into Mozart's family dynamic. So the Hafner, the namesake for this symphony, was Siegmund Hafner, who was a very influential figure in Salzburg, and who was sort of an import-export businessman and had made a fortune and was very influential. Year before this, so in 1781, Mozart was commissioned to write a series of short pieces called Hafner's Serenade, which is a separate piece from the symphony we're going to perform for you on this particular program. And the Hafner's Serenade was a commission by Siegmund Hafner on the occasion of their daughter's wedding. Fast forward 1 year to July of 1782, and Mozart is, you could tell from his letters to his father that he's very stressed and he's very busy. He says that one of his operas, which was very successful, the abduction from Salerio, was very successful. Somebody wanted to have an arrangement of some of the big melodies and some of the big arias from this opera for a smaller ensemble, so more people. Of course, this is before the days of streaming, of course, before the days of radio and recording. So how did the general public get to know what was the latest, most fashionable and popular operas? Well, not everybody could afford to go to opera theaters. So what composers did was they would fashion these arrangements, little suites, oftentimes for small ensemble of wind instruments, like octet, like 8 people. And oftentimes they will be played like in the street corners, from the balconies, in people's parties. And that's how a lot of these melodies sort of got disseminated to the general public. So he said he was going to take this on himself. Sometimes he would have one of his students or younger composers to take on this task, but this particular one he wanted to do himself. He had his own wedding that was coming up, and I think that was actually like early August of this year. But his father really wanted him to take on this commission from Siegmund Hofner to write a new symphony on, now this time, the occasion of their sons becoming a nobility. There was like some kind of a special ceremony for that, and they wanted a special music for that occasion. And of course, Mozart was the most natural choice. But in this letter replying to his father, he's saying, you don't know how, you have no idea how busy I am. But then here's where the passive aggressive side of it kind of comes in. He says, yeah, I guess I'll do it. I'll have to, yeah, if I have to stay up all night to do this, yeah, I can do that. I'll get it done. It must be done. So I'll do it for you, father. That kind of tone. Actually, Mozart barely made the deadline for this piece. And months later, there was another performance of this symphony, and actually Mozart couldn't even attend the premiere when it was first performed in Salzburg. But there was an occasion for his music to be featured at one of the concerts in Vienna a few months later. So Mozart thought, oh, there was this symphony I just wrote for the Hofner family. I should include that on the program. So then he asked the music, the manuscripts were still with his father. So he asked for the music back, and true to form, Leopold, his father, I guess on purpose is what I'm assuming, held on to it as long as he could as sort of a payback for his son barely getting the piece done on time. And he finally sends it back a couple of months later. And then Mozart writes to his father again upon receiving the manuscripts of his symphony, in which and I'm not sure he was serious or he was being facetious, in which he literally says, I was delighted to see the music that I wrote, the symphony, Hofner symphony that I had written, for I had forgotten every single note of it. And so he said he had forgotten what he composed, and he was reminded how energetic and how great this piece was upon receiving the parts back. So we don't know how much of this he was being serious, or if there was some kind of a little bit of a joke going on here. But for this particular performance in Vienna, he also decided to kind of revise it a little bit. So the orchestra in Salzburg that played the premiere for the ceremony for Hofner's son did not have flutes or clarinets, but he knew that the orchestra in Vienna did. So for this occasion, he decided to add the flutes and clarinets to join the rest of the colleagues in the woodwind, so in the orchestra, so oboes and bassoons, and so on, 2 horns, 2 trumpets, and timpani. And originally actually contained even more movements, but he wanted to fashion this as a true symphony. So he got rid of a few of the shorter movements to kind of come up with the Hofner symphony as we know today, which is in 4 movements. Something interesting happened also at the premiere of this concert, and today's listeners might find this rather strange, but this was sort of a more common practice than one might think back in Mozart's day, and which was at this performance of the symphony. So it's sort of the first performance of the revised version of the Hofner symphony, again as we know today. They performed first three movements. And then before performing the final movement, they actually performed other works by Mozart. So it's almost as though the concert opened with the three movements of this relatively very brand new symphony by Mozart. But then it went on to other things by Mozart, maybe some arias, some piano pieces, something with chorus and so on. And then concluded the evening with the final movement of the symphony. It kind of works. It works. The beauty of this piece is that it works either way. You can hear it as a whole, as a four-movement symphony. First movement opens in a very regal manner, kind of fitting for the occasion that it was originally commissioned for. Second movement is this elegant slow movement, and then you have a third movement which is short, this kind of the minuet movement, which sort of a courtly dance movement, and then the finale, which is very much sort of a showpiece for the entire orchestra, with fast-running notes and goes to a brilliant conclusion. So it's one of the most popular symphonies that Mozart wrote, and it's always a fun piece to do with the orchestra. So, and we did it here many years ago. Towards the beginning of my tenure here, so I'm looking forward to kind of bringing this piece back to conclude this concert. To open the concert, we go back even further than 1782 to 1717. And again in July, in this particular instance, this was, and we know this again because this time the record keeping was immaculate because it had to do with King George I. We know that on July 19th of 1717, the piece that you're going to hear at the beginning of the concert, the Water Music by Handel, was first performed. The occasion was literally King George decided to go on the river, on the Thames, and on the barge, and he actually wanted a separate barge with musicians that will play a live accompaniment. So it's like having a live band for your cruise, a brief cruise down the river. Started at 8 o'clock. And then apparently at 11 p.m. they disembarked somewhere for dinner. And there was some additional music indoors, probably parts of the water music that actually you're not going to hear on this concert, but there are few of the movements of water music written for very small forces, and we think those were probably written for indoor entertainment rather than the outdoor entertainment, like the rest of the piece. And then at some point, then they went back onto the barge and went sort of cruising again. So it was probably a long evening for everybody. King George I and his company, including Handel and his musicians. But the king enjoyed this music so much that apparently he wanted this piece performed, ended up playing it like 3 times through or something like this. What you're hearing tonight is sort of some of the most popular movements from this water music. Water music, as we know today, exists in 3 separate suites. And if you combine them all, it is like a whole, it's like almost like an hour or so. It's like a 50-some minutes. But we're kind of doing sort of the Reader's Digest version of it, sort of the most popular movements like the air, hornpipe, and so on. And these are all, again, thinking about the nature of its premiere. It was sort of the entertainment for alfresco outdoor entertainment. So it's a lot of sort of a dance-like movements using sort of the popular dance forms of the day in the early part of the 18th century. And it actually features quite a big parts for the horns, trumpets as well, oboes and bassooning in addition to the strings. So it comes much earlier in Handel's British-English career, if you would. He started really working in the earnest in England just a few years before this. Of course, we now know him from famous works like Messiah, that he wrote like in 1741. There's another piece that was written for outdoor entertainment, and that's music for the royal fireworks. that used even more musicians just to compete with the sound of the fireworks, and that comes even later, like 1749 or something. But this is sort of one of his early successes in England. Of course, Handel was born in Germany, grew up in Germany, and the connection with King George I actually happened around 1710 or so. Handel became the Kapellmeister, so Kapellmeister, sort of a music director, if you would, Kapellmeister for the court of Hanover. And the elector of that court at the time later became King George I in 1714. So there was prior connection between Handel, and that's how Handel ended up working a lot in England and became very popular in England. So that's the water music. And then following the water music, we also have another Baroque master composer, Vivaldi, as I mentioned earlier, with his concerto for two cellos, and then sort of the oddity, not oddity, but sort of the something different on this otherwise very much 18th century program is the work, as I mentioned, from 1982 by Astor Piazzolla, the Argentine tango master. Called the Grand Tango, featuring Dusan Vukajlovic. And in the special arrangement, originally the piece was written for cello and piano. The version that you're going to hear at this concert is for solo cello with string orchestra. So it has a kind of a different character to it. And I had a chance to talk with both Dusan and Ismail about both of these pieces. So please enjoy that a little bit of clip where we talk about the Vivaldi and Piazzolla. So now we are joined by both Dusan and Ismail to talk about the two pieces on this program that features the cello as a solo instrument. But I thought, since this is kind of a great opportunity for those of you who are listening to this to kind of get to know our soloists and get to know the soloists who are also part of our orchestra. So I think we'll take the first few minutes and kind of, I don't know who wants to go first, but if each of you can kind of, tell us a little bit about, yourself and your background and so on, and
Okay.
how you came to be in the SC Phil. I think that will be a good
All
start.
right.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'll go
I'll
first.
go.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I go. From Atlanta, Georgia originally, and I first joined South Carolina Philharmonic when I was studying um, my master's program at Mercer University at the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings. And I remember traveling from Macon, Georgia to um, to South Carolina to Columbia, in between in between rehearsals, and so it's been a great experience, and just want to thank Morihiko and South Carolina Philharmonic for giving me the opportunity to perform some Vivaldi with Dusan.
Yeah. And now let's see. So, but now you now live in Colombia, right, Ishmael?
Yes, I live in Columbia,
But
South
then now
Carolina now.
so tell us a little bit about, your the places where you've been teaching and, that type of
Oh,
thing.
you're talking about the Highway Philharmonic, the driving
Right, yeah.
one. Yeah, so I currently teach in about 5 different institutions in Atlanta. Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, Clayton State University, and Atlanta Music Project. I got about 12 students that I all teach on Mondays and Tuesdays, and then back on the road Tuesday night to Columbia
Mhm.
or wherever I'm performing next. So
Nice, nice. And
that's
then
right.
you also playing a few other orchestras as well in the, as you mentioned, like Freeway,
That's right.
Freeway
Freeway
Philharmonic.
Philharmonic.
So yeah.
Yes, sir. Like Hilton Head, South Carolina, with the Hilton Head Symphony, or Savannah Philharmonic, and
Greenville.
Greenville.
Greenville
That's
too.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Greenville.
Wait, so like how many miles do you normally put on your car like each
It's
year?
about 50,000 miles a year.
Wow.
Oh, you're worse than me.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
that's
I'm
a
doing
lot.
40.
Yeah.
40.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow. Yeah,
That's
so
right.
let's see. Now, let's see. Does Julie still teach at Mercer or no? You
No,
study with Julie Albers, right?
Yes, I did have an
Ah,
opportunity to study with her. I think Julie is a principal over at St. Paul, uh, the,
orchestra. Yeah.
yeah, chamber orchestra in Minnesota. And I'm not sure if she still is still over at Mercer, but
I can't remember. Yeah, when she played, because I've worked with her a few times. I think
right,
we did the Dvorak together in Colombia. Were you
that's
already
right.
in the orchestra then? I'm trying to
I
remember.
was.
Yes, I was
Ismail,
in the
you were in the
orchestra. I
orchestra.
joined 2011
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that was
or
definitely.
2010. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. 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 And then
that's right.
Dusan, you started the same year I did, right? Officially or no?
Yes, your audition was my first performance with
Oh, right.
SFL, and that was like a last minute call.
So that was in, I think, so fall of 2007, I think, right? That was
Something
my
like that. I didn't even
audition
take
concert.
audition. They just called me because I was at school at University of South Carolina.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Mm,
was
So,
local and they called me for your performance.
right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
But I think you auditioned. Um, so
that year when you won the job, I
right.
auditioned.
So
I won like
2008.
a assistant principal
Right.
job, and then a couple of years later, I got like assistant principal
Right. Right.
position with that job while I was still doing my doctorate at
Hmm.
USC.
Yeah. So yeah, Dushan,
yeah.
tell us a little bit more about your
I was born in
story.
Belgrade, Serbia, and most of my studies, like undergrad studies and all that, so happened over there. And then I came to the States and did my master's, finished at Georgia State with Martha Gashevsky, and then I studied with I'm trying to remember the name. My names of at the Lynn University, I studied with Johanna Perron and then with Robert Jesselson at USC for my doctorate. And that's like when I won auditions with SFL and then also with Charleston and Greenville that I play now. So,
Mhm.
and I still play with the trio, Upton Trio in
Right.
Columbia / Camden.
Right. Yeah.
So,
So now you're now based in Greenville.
Greenville, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So yeah. So like with your background, as far as like the School of Music at University of South Carolina, there are several members of the orchestra who kind of came into our fold that way. I took the
yeah,
audition, started subbing with the orchestra while they were studying, and then won the positions and so on. So you're like your example of that as well. So yeah, it's looking forward to doing this Vivaldi concerto for two cellos with both of you as soloists, and then Dushan, you'll be doing the Grand Tango by Astor Piazzolla as well. Sort of the accompaniment is arranged for strings rather than with piano, so it's a different version of it than some of the people might be used to. But yeah, let's start with the Vivaldi a little bit. So right, so didn't I think Vivaldi wrote like 500 concertos, like altogether,
Right.
a
that
lot.
we know of. I mean,
My question for Ishmael, like, have you ever played this one before?
I have
Like, when you
had
were
the
when you were studying cello, have you ever played this at all? Like, have you learned it before?
yes, I
You did,
remember.
because I haven't.
Well,
Like, this is my
oh
first
man,
time ever playing this.
right,
oh man, no pressure, right?
No, I mean it's not. It's not that
Yeah,
difficult, but still, like I've never played it.
right.
yeah, it's fun, man. I think what I like most about it is just the consistent accompaniment of eighth notes in the orchestra. Like you feel really grounded, um, and all the notes that we put in between just really embellishes what's going on um, in the surrounding overall. Is really exciting to play.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So Dushan is a yeah. So it's I guess it's I wonder. Yeah, I don't know how often this particular concerto by Vivaldi for two cellos, and that's the only one that he wrote for featuring two cellos as solo instruments.
Yeah.
We did what last year? We did the one for 4 violins. I mean, you know, I mean that's why I mean when you write 500 concertos, they're bound to be like something for everybody at some point. But yeah, so this one, yeah, this you know, but it's interesting because the piece itself, you know, it's very typical Vivaldi or any Baroque concerto, right? It's in 3 movements, fast, slow, fast. But there, you know, some unusual thing about this particular piece to me, like typically with you know Baroque concerto, the orchestra starts. When you think of like Four Seasons or you know like any other famous concertos from the Baroque period, usually the ritornello, the orchestra, starts the main idea. Then the soloist comes in to repeat it, basically. It's sort of the opposite in this one. So it's the you guys, you know, the cellos, the soloists, you start and essentially just accompanied by the continuo. So again, that's another cellist, you know, so Ying is going to be playing principal for this concert. So, you know, she's going to be playing the harpsichord and so on. So, you know, it's got the opening of it is kind of unique for Vivaldi. And then you got the whole, you know, you kind of, at the beginning of the piece, you're kind of alternating, you know, the two solos are kind of,
yes, and it leaves a room kind of like a rhythmical improvisation. Like I don't think that it has to be rhythmically precise for the first few measures until everybody comes in.
Right.
But it gives you a room to kind of develop.
Yeah.
The whole,
and that, folks, is
why
I enjoy working with Dusan. This guy knows what he's doing.
But I don't want to like everything to sound the same like from the beginning, but like there I think in this particular piece all this like early Baroque music and classical music, everything is rhythmically very precise. This one sounds to me more improvisation, like especially at the beginning where you can take a little bit of time to play until everybody, the tutti comes in, and then you have to keep the tempo steady from that point on. But gives you a nice, same thing like in the second movement, like it gives you a really nice playground for improvisation to do whatever you want. So like with the notes, not rhythmical, but like nodal improvisation.
Right.
That's
yeah. And then the second movement, you know. Also is, you know, it's different because basically the orchestra, it's just you guys, you know, with the continuo.
Yeah.
Basically. So, you know, the rest of the orchestra is basically resting during that whole movement. So again, there's that level of, in a way, like there's a level of intimacy and freedom, you know, in that movement. And then the last movement, you know, is more of your, I guess, prototypical concerto, right? Like
it's the only one.
Yeah, it's the only one. The orchestra starts, the ritornello starts the main idea, you know. It just kind of there's a certain level of, in a way, like storm or like there's a little bit of a turbulent quality to it in a way. So it's it's a piece again that I don't think it's performed that often, you know. Well, especially because when we think of cello concertos, probably the earliest concerto that you often hear as far as a concerto setting with orchestra is, you know, the Haydn concerto.
And even those ones are not performed that often.
Right.
And like major concerto, like yes, definitely. Like because Boccherini is never. I don't find Boccherini performed like with the orchestra.
Or like a CP Bach has
things like that. Like
and out of, you know, the 500 pieces that Vivaldi wrote, I looked and saw that cello is only featured in about 27 of his compositions out of 500.
Yeah.
So
but
that's cool.
So right, because I mean that's an interesting thought too, because as the instrument, right, it was still, I mean, when he was writing it, I mean, there were
the instrument wasn't developed, so like that's like why they didn't play it, like
exactly.
the final thoughts of cello came like in like 1800s when the endpin came in, like the last bit, and that was the early 1800s. So like everything was still Baroque style of playing.
Right.
But yeah, it's.
So let's see. So that's good. Any other things you want to share about the Vivaldi? Before we go on to the Piazzolla?
Trying to see.
I'm excited to perform it.
Yeah.
Me too. I mean, I've never performed it, so yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Trying to think. Is there anything in orchestration? No. No, I mean.
No, I think yeah, it is a concerto that
is odd.
Well, yeah, it's odd, unique, in a good way. Yeah.
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 Because I think also it's because by the virtue of having two soloists, I think that kind of adds to that sense that really it's very much like the solo part driven concerto, as opposed to some other concertos where the orchestra has more of a equal partner.
How many double concertos did he write?
A lot, actually. I mean, they're
all double,
doubles, triples. There's that quadruple.
Yeah, I mean, I know quadruple, like violins and all that.
There are several. I mean, when you think about the whole concerto grosso concept, and the fact that there was also always the continual group that was attached, right, to the solo part. So the whole notion of truly solo concerto, where it's just like one person playing one instrument featured against the backdrop of the whole orchestra, that's still coming, later in a way. So, but usually, because of the concerto grosso idea, usually the orchestra is a lot more active in a way than this particular piece. So, but that's hope I think you guys should just have a lot of fun up there and enjoy the dialogue with each other, and also and again, that's the nice thing about the double cello concerto with the continuo. So you have three cellists who are like very much right in the middle of all the action here, So I think that's
cool.
That's something unique. Yeah. And then we get to this this piece by Piazzolla, Astor Piazzolla. So all of a sudden, we have on this program, we open with water music, some of the selections from water music by Handel. Then we have this Vivaldi concerto. Then we have the Mozart Hafner Symphony. So everything is from way back, and except for the Piazzolla, which was written in the 1980s, rather than something like 1780s or so. So so we have this piece, Grand Tango by Piazzolla, which was originally written for cello and piano, and we're doing the version for cello and string orchestra on this particular program. And so it's we were discussing offline a little bit about this kind of an interesting genesis of this piece. So Piazzolla wrote this piece for the famous cellist Rostropovich. My understanding is that he wasn't commissioned to write it. I think he just wrote the piece and he wanted to dedicate it to Rostropovich, is my understanding. So he did that in like 1982. And I think he sent the music to Rostropovich. It wasn't officially premiered until like 8 years later, like 1990 or something like that.
Yeah, 1990, New Orleans.
Yeah. So the story is, apparently Rostropovich, when he got the score, and of course the thing about Rostropovich was that when you think about all of the concertos, not just concertos, but all of concertos, chamber music, sonatas, solo pieces, unaccompanied pieces. I I don't even know how many pieces he premiered in his career, right? I mean, we're talking like Shostakovich concerto all the way to,
Hundreds.
yeah, like the pieces that are now firmly established as standard cello repertoire.
I mean, he's probably the most influential cellist
Yeah.
of the 20th century. I mean, I know that UMI is probably the most popular, but most influential as far as pieces and compositions that were commissions for. And like when he showed up for the first time, I mean, honestly, that was like mind-blowing thing. Even though Feuermann 20, 30 years before that was still that good, but nobody cared. But
Yeah,
I don't know if there was a radio thing that kind of made Rostropovich more popular or not, but yeah, that he was incredible.
yeah, I mean he was just, you know, tireless in commissioning new works and performing them and also recording them. And I think that's how, you know, his influence is still felt today because of those recordings, right? And all these concertos that he commissioned, even
Sonatas
later,
written and like
yeah,
not.
even later in his career, you know,
Yeah.
he didn't. Whereas, you know, maybe some performers, they might do a lot of new music or commissions when they're starting out, but then, you know, towards the end, you know, they just want to kind of focus on the pieces they've done. But he was always, I think, wanting to learn new. You know, there was like a thirst,
Yeah.
incredible thirst for new discovery. So the flip side of that, I think, is that he probably got, and he had that reputation. So I'm sure like composers were probably sending him scores all the time. And he was also, you know, he conducted as well, right? So I mean, he conducted the National Symphony as a music director up in, you know, Kennedy Center for a while, and you know, around the world too. So both for him to conduct and both for him to play and conduct, I'm sure like people were sending scores all the time, solicited or unsolicited. And I think with this piece, with this Piazzolla, I think initially it was sort of in the unsolicited pile because
Yeah.
Rostropovich later said like he at the time did not know who Piazzolla was. So, you know, he now, you know, Astor Piazzolla, his music is very, you know, very popular, right? You hear that in concerts. There are all these transcriptions for piano trio of, you know, a lot of his tango and, you know, different tangos and so on. But back in the 80s, I guess, you know, he quite wasn't as familiar maybe to quote classical performers, unquote. So he kind of let it sit for a few years. So that explains the big break between the composition and premiere. So the story goes, Rostropovich was doing a South American tour one year. And remember that Piazzolla had sent him this new piece for piano and cello and piano. So he brought it out and he started playing it, and he's like he really loved the piece. But then he said he wanted to make some changes to the solo part from the cello part. So he basically went through the whole piece, I think edited heavily. And when he was making a stop in Buenos Aires, they got together, like, you know, Rostropovich and Piazzolla met and essentially basically spent the whole day just kind of playing through the piece, kind of talking about different ideas. And I guess Piazzolla was kind of coaching Rostropovich a little bit on the tango style too. So there was like, and then Rostropovich in turn was kind of giving Piazzolla advice on how to write things with cello to make it, to sort of maximize his intent. So that was sort of how that process worked out, which is kind of, you know, it's interesting when you the fact they sat there for a long time, the fact that Rostropovich actually then, you know, had a lot of input in how the solo part was gonna be made, and then the fact that Piazzolla then coached Rostropovich on the tango stuff, you know. So it was kind of all interesting kind of collaboration that kind of, you know, brought this piece together. But so let's see, I mean, for like Ismail, have you played like his like Piazzolla's other pieces, like other
Yes,
cellos in different chamber music and that sort of thing?
yeah, yes, I have. I know that there are a few cello solos in Piazzolla's Four Seasons.
Hmm.
I think it's in one of the movements. So yeah, that's when I had a chance to work with, play some Piazzolla then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think Dusan with your
The
trio.
piano trio, I played like several arrangements like of
Yeah,
his tangos, like for the piano trio, and like that's quite interesting to do. It's a completely different technique,
right.
of like not quite classical technique that you use, and a lot of things are not written in that you can kind of improvise on that, because that's what they did like when they played like bars or wherever they performed like tangos like in Argentina with his band, like because he had like his band like
Right.
playing like tangos like throughout his career.
Right.
So yeah.
Dusan, can you talk a little bit about, I think people call them like extended techniques, is whether like you have a Bartok pits or you have like Kalingo.
There
Does
is
Piazzolla do any?
nothing much like that. It's more
Okay.
rhythmical that you can get like certain like slides and like sul ponticello like squeaky sounds, even though they're not written in there. But
Okay.
like he didn't write anything like technically like Bartok pits that is like very specific to the
Right.
technique of that. But honestly, it's more, I think he was influenced a lot by jazz, so a lot
Right.
of it is improvisation that you can do in the pieces, even though it's not written in.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of freedom that you can do playing his music, and even notation can be taken for me in person, like personally, like you can take it loosely and kind of improvise on that as well, and even add some effects to it while you're playing it, so it's not strictly like what's on page
Right.
once you see it. But yeah,
Yeah.
he was influenced a lot by improvisation and jazz, him studying music and growing up, because I think he grew up in the States,
Yeah, he
like
actually spent most
from
of
early on.
yeah, New York.
Mm.
He grew up more in New York.
Yeah, like, and then like kind of went back between New York and Argentina,
Yeah. And that's
and
good because
then
yeah.
Europe when he studied like music and what, like in Paris and whatnot.
Yeah,
Whoa.
he studied with Nadia Boulanger.
Nadia Boulanger and then Ginestera as well in
Right.
Argentina.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and actually, I think she was the one who kind of encouraged him to do tango,
Right.
because he
Yeah.
wanted to do classical.
Right.
And she
So
wasn't impressed with his classical pieces, but then when she heard like tango, and she was like, no, maybe that
right.
would be better choice.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the famous story. I think
Yeah, so I don't know if that's
he
true or
was
not.
trying to be, he was trying to write sort of what he felt was proper, proper
See,
style of
that's my
modern music.
connection. That's my connection to him, because my teacher Martha Gishevsky stayed at Nadia Bolazhin's house when she studied with Navarra in
Oh,
Paris.
oh
That was
wow.
her home.
Whoa.
So she was at her house like for a couple of years while she studied with Andre Navarra in Paris. So she was
Yeah.
there during the 60s, I believe.
Okay.
So I don't know when Piazzolla was there, probably around that time. Like I would
Yeah,
say like late 50s, 60s, maybe.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But Ishmael, to your point, what was interesting for me with this piece, and then realizing we're doing the transcription as far as the piano part's been transcribed for strings, but I expected even in the cello part to see a lot more like his sort of prototypical, like a tango technique that's specific.
Right.
There's a specific notations he would use for a lot of these different
Right.
effects, and it's almost absent, you know.
Mm.
And I wasn't sure if that was because I'm not sure if that was because of what Rostropovich was willing or was not willing to do on his
Right.
instrument. But it's interesting. But like you said, Dusan, I think there's a lot of room for. I mean, it's more, yeah, like you said, it's a lot more like jazz influenced. So in a way, there's a lot of freedom that one can take.
Yeah.
It's the only thing is, I wonder, because his Piazzolla's instrument was bandoneon,
Bandonian.
and then he wrote it for cello and piano. Piano has a certain way of, obviously a certain timbre, certain way you can articulate on piano, and now it's down for strings. So it's I'm curious
But like
to see how that comes out.
there are recordings like bandonian, bass, and cello
Right.
playing the same piece
Right,
as
yeah.
well. So like it's
Wow.
you can do it in different versions. I think bandonian is very, and piano as well, it gives you a nice rhythmical background
Hmm.
to kind of play with it. With
What is-
orchestra, it's not, I don't know how, like just like listening to it, it's not as tight rhythmically, even though like they can play it perfectly well. To me, like it's not like as bandonian, like it's not crisp
Yeah.
rhythm coming out.
What is a bandonian? What is that?
Bandonian is like a little accordion that is like,
Oh.
like in my country, like we have two different accordions. So you have like a one with the piano keyboard, and then you have one with the buttons.
Yep.
So
No.
bandonian is like a mini accordion with buttons. So I don't know how to
Whoa.
describe it.
That's cool.
It has actually, bandoneon started out in Germany,
Oh, really?
because back in, like, all these like smaller churches, they couldn't afford to build an organ.
Oh, wow.
So they built this like a little concertina instrument that they could use in small churches, and somehow ended up in, on the streets of Buenos Aires, right? Like
Yeah.
years later. But yeah, yeah, and then you can push the same button,
Yeah.
but it'll give you a different pitch whether you are, expanding or retracting the.
Yeah.
So, it has a very unique, unique sound and unique way of like articulating notes.
It's funny because I've been listening to a lot of
Yeah.
Gotham project, and it
Oh,
doesn't
right.
have to do anything with solar or anything. It's electronic music, but it's
Right.
based on tango. So,
Nice.
it's French people doing it, but it's very interesting, and they use bandonian a lot.
And thank you for joining us, and see you at the concert.